Hello, my name is Dr. Sedgwick Easley, Assistant to the Mayor of the Incorporated Village of Hempstead, and we are here this morning in response to conditions at 545 Fulton Avenue on today. I am joined today with our Mayor, Mayor Dawn Ryan, with Trustee Waylon Hobbs, with our legislator, Sheila Bynum, also with First Assistant Chief Kyle Boyles, and with our George Sanders, head of Hempstead Office of Emergency Management, and our Assistant Police Chief, Chief Cogan, on today. At this time, I'm going to turn this portion of the press conference over to our Trustee Waylon Hobbs, who is in charge of Emergency Management at this time.
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. My name is Waylon Hobbs, Trustee of the Incorporated Village of Hempstead, in charge of emergency services for the Village of Hempstead. At 7:17 a.m. This morning, Northwell received a call of people complaining about feeling sick from possible CO poisoning. And of course, it's their rules and regulation that they can't enter into a building because they're not equipped to measure the CO readings, so that immediately they call for the Hempstead Police Department and Fire Department. Once the Fire Department respond, our First Assistant Chief Kyle Bowles, the readings were above normal, and at that time he called for additional manpower to come to the scene. We also found out the source of the problem were illegally installed heating units in this building at 545 Fulton Street in Hempstead, New York. These heating units, there were no permits applied for them, no plumbing, and because of bad installation, the chief decided that they would check all the apartments in the building. Upon inspection, we found out that the majority of the apartments in the building had this illegal heating unit installed. At that time, we called for our building department, our superintendent of our building department to come, and I also received a call, and when I arrived to the scene, I realized that it was a situation where it appeared that we had a landlord that was taking advantage of people that were in a situation who would not normally report these type of violations. It is our village policy and in our code that every 3 years we have what is called fire inspections of buildings. And so if we did not get a complaint, we would have never known the condition of this building, because we rely on the village residents to call us when there are issues of village building violations. But because, again, I believe the landlord was taking advantage of a population of people that were afraid to report these types of violations, and because of this, we are grateful that no one was any fatalities in the situation, because again, the readings were above normal, and this could have turned out worse than it did. I want to say thank you to our police department that did a great job. I want to say thank you to our fire department and our chief that made sure that all of the resources were there. Also, we had from the Village of Hempstead, Chief George Sanders, who is in charge of the Village Office of Emergency Management. He called all the agencies that was necessary to be there. And later on, if there's any questions, Chief Sanders will inform you of the different agencies that came to assist us in this situation. Again, I want to say job well done from our police department and our Hempstead Fire Department. Thank you so much. At this time, we'll turn it in the hands of our mayor, Mayor Ryan.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Certainly want to thank Trustee Waylon Hobbs. It was his phone call that got myself and the Deputy Mayor Charles Renfro at the scene. We certainly want to thank Chief Kyle Bowles. He was the first one at the scene, and I want to thank all who followed. The cooperation and the effort of all the agencies and all the people that were there prevented what could have been a disaster. It turns out to be a situation where the individuals who needed medical care received it. The rest of the individuals have been taken to Kennedy Park on a temporary basis. George Sanders wears more than one hat, He's not only head of the emergency services for the Village of Hempstead, he's our superintendent of Parks and Recreation, and we thank him for being so kind and making sure Kennedy Park had all the resources needed for those individuals who are temporarily homeless. So it's something very special when we see the cooperation that Trustee Hobbs mentioned. All of the agencies are to be thanked, and I'm doing so at this time. We not only have George Sanders to answer questions, but Chief Colgan, who put some statistics together for me and the other people on the dais here, also is available to answer those questions as well. And our legislator, been at Kennedy Park, and can report on that and other things, and we know that she's always concerned about the Village of Hempstead, and we love her for that. So let me bring up Sheila Bino.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon. As stated, my name is Sheila Bino, legislator for the 2nd District. I'd like to first start out by thanking the Hempstead Police Department and the Hempstead Fire Department for its response and for carrying out all of the emergency services that were required this morning that resulted in no fatalities. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank Nassau County Office of Emergency Management, its Commissioner, Stephen Morelli, for contacting me today and making me aware of what took place, and for all of the resources that they were able to provide today. They brought the MERV down today, and they were able to evaluate some of the residents of the building as the office as the ambulance services were also attending to some of the individuals who are stating that they felt ill. I arrived at Kennedy Park, where I was able to greet many of the residents that arrived off of Nice Bus. We also want to extend an appreciation to them as well. While there, we were able to speak with some of the residents who were speaking of their conditions. And in one case, a young woman she felt sick and became overwhelmed. And we had North Shore ambulance respond, and she was actually taken off to the hospital. So I wouldn't say we're out of the woods yet. I will tell you that the families that are there are very appreciative of the Red Cross and the Village of Hempstead and their response. But at this point, the Department of Social Services will be working in tandem with the Office of Red Cross and the Village of Hempstead, along with my office, to ensure that the needs of the residents are met throughout the next coming days and weeks as the Village of Hempstead works to resolve this issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions?
What specifically was illegal or wrong with the heating units in the apartments?
Well, they didn't apply for the proper permits for the installation of the units, and just the whole installation itself was not done professionally. And it was because the pipes weren't connected right, was able to emit the CO gases throughout the building.
So just to explain, were these individual heating units in the apartments that the tenants installed, or that the
No. The landlord installed these heating units in each apartment.
How many apartments are
Steam
there?
by what?
How were they powered?
Electric?
Electric. It was powered by electric, gas, and I'm sorry. It was
15.
heated by gas. So they didn't have permits for the plumbing to hook up the gas lines to install. And again, these units were placed in what appeared to be closets or even cupboards. And so, it wasn't properly installed.
How long ago do you think they were installed?
Well, it's hard to say because, again, as I stated, our code requires every 3 years that we do an inspection for the fire department, and that inspection is just to cover the grounds and the inside and make sure that there are alarms installed, but we don't go inside the apartment. And the only way that we would make inspections in the apartment, again, if a resident called about a violation. And as I stated earlier, I believe that this landlord took advantage of the fact that he had residents that were afraid to report such violations. And because of this, this is why our building department was never informed that these violations existed.
And can you give us the range of symptoms that people had and the severity of those symptoms, and once again just confirm how many total were transported to a hospital?
Right. At this time, I'm going to turn it in the hands of Chief Sanders, and he'll give us that information.
Yes, hi, what was your question? How many people were transported?
Yeah, how many transported, and what was the range and severity of their symptoms?
First of all, there were every tenant that was evacuated from the building was evaluated by a medical team on staff in the MERV bus from Nassau County. There were 28 people that were taken from the building that were found to have higher than normal carbon monoxide readings in their blood. Out of those 28, 9 were actually transported to local hospitals. The other 18, they were treated on scene with oxygen. Their levels returned to normal. All their vital signs would return to normal, so they were released on their own.
And the ones that had the highest level?
I think one was around 25 parts per million in their blood, which is pretty high.
How high? Can you just
It's not, they're not going to die from it, but it should be 0. So they were high enough to be transported.
So 28 had symptoms, or
28
had elevated readings. How many people live in the building?
I have no idea. All we know, there were 16 apartments in the building.
You said, I think the release had said 100, is that?
It's 15.
15, there was 4 on each floor.
Yeah, 3 in the basement. 4 on floors 1, 2, and 3, and 3 in the
15
basement.
apartments. Stand corrected. I have no idea how many residents were in each apartment.
Do you know who the landlord is? Is this a privately owned?
I don't know that.
Yes. So it's the owner. The company is called Pebble LLC. That's the company that owns the building, and Benjamin, I don't have his last name, is the owner. And so he was actually at the scene while we were there, and at that time I instructed our superintendent of buildings to call all of our resources, every inspector, and start inspecting every apartment in that building.
So how long will they be out of the building?
Well, it looks like an estimate that it's going to be at least 15 days because, again, they had to turn off all of the gas. And because of this, we know that the weather's cold, and we can't have anybody stand in that building because they won't have gas back on at least for 15 days because they have to check each apartment, and whatever the violation is, each violation has to be corrected before the gas is turned on.
Was it leaking CO in multiple apartments, or just as far as you know, one location?
No, they discovered it in multiple apartments.
Does this landlord own other buildings in Hempstead, and are you concerned for those buildings?
Well, as of now, we have no record of him owning any other buildings in the village of Hempstead. The mayor and the trustees discussed even at that scene that the village is going to do its due diligence to make sure that we improve on even how often we inspect these buildings or look to change some of our ordinance. Again, right now, our ordinance only require for fire inspections every 3 years. And so we have to do our job to make sure that these residents that are vulnerable and afraid to report these conditions, that we put things in place that we demand that the owners of our buildings, all in Hempstead, have yearly inspections.
Why do you think they're vulnerable? What would make them take advantage of it?
Well, I would say based on the population of the people that were there, and most of the residents in that building were Latino. And I don't want to say just because being Latino, but anytime you have people that can barely make it, and with their finances, they're oftentimes afraid to report violations because they're afraid that there's going to be retaliation, that they'll be put out of the building. When you have people that's living from paycheck to paycheck, they don't have the option to be able to say, well, I'll just move to another building. And so that's what I mean by vulnerable.
Do you know what they were paying in rent in that building?
No, I don't.
Is there a history of violations even from the 3-year inspections? Any history of violations in this building?
Well, the last violation that we have on record that they received was in 2017.
What was that violation?
I don't have that information.
And what about this landlord, was he the landlord at that time? Do you know?
I don't have that information.
So we don't know what he's looking at in the way of violations yet, but we expect.
Well, we know that there's several violations that he's looking at. Again, every apartment in that building, the installation of those heating units are wrong. So we're talking about 15 to 16 apartments. He's facing a ton of violations.
Can we ask the chief, just based on the happened in the middle of the night when everybody's sleeping. If you could just address, like, really how lucky we are that this wasn't a big tragedy.
My name is Kyle Bowles, First Assistant Chief of Hempstead Fire Department. The only thing I can tell you, one of the apartments had a reading of 140 parts per million. As I went upstairs, before I even hit the door, my meter was going off. I found 2 residents in the back room that was passed out. I notified one of my operators to call Northwell upstairs. They came, they took the mother and the child outside. But like Chief Hobbs said, if I had a member who didn't come, who didn't speak Spanish, I would have never knew that the lady was in the back room, her and her daughter. I would have never knew, because they were too scared to tell us what was going on.
How
So
old was the child?
the child, I think, was 2 years old,
And passed out?
and passed out. Yes.
And 140
Parts per million in the-
Give us a sense of what that means.
It's a high reading, very high reading.
If you're in that environment for,
Yeah.
say, 8 hours,
Can you have
Yeah.
the microphone? We won't hear you.
So,
yeah, if you were in that environment for, say, 8 hours when they were sleeping, we probably would have had fatalities in that apartment house.
And is that to say that the 28 people who were evacuated, they were all given blood tests?
No, they don't get a blood test. It's like you put your finger in the machine, it reads the oxygen. Well, we have something called a RAD 57, which measures the content of carbon monoxide. And those 28 people originally that had high carbon monoxide, like I said, some were treated at the scene, and out of 19 of those 28, through the administration of oxygen, it was able to be lowered within normal limits, and they were released from the scene. The other 9, it couldn't be lowered at the scene. They were transported to local hospitals.
Do you know why it happened now? I mean, if these were installed a while back, and is there a word of caution you can give to the general public?
General public, if you're going to have anything done, especially when it involves anything that has to do with combustion, where you're giving off fumes, and one of those fumes is carbon monoxide, just make sure everything is properly vented and it's done by someone that's licensed to do this.
And do you know why all of a sudden this kind of exploded this morning into a problem?
No, I don't. I don't have an answer for that, sorry.
Can we ask the legislators, since you were with the evacuees, are they upset, scared? I mean, what are they going to do for 15 days now?
Yeah, they were concerned from everything to how would they contact their children, to being able to pick them up from school. Many of them had family members that were in the hospital receiving oxygen. They were trying to stay in touch via phone. One gentleman did have even had his lease in his pocket, because housing is the most important thing for them. And so they're very concerned about what the next few days will look like for them. And but they do feel like they were under duress there, that as Trustee Waylon Hobbs has stated, that the landlord had put provisions on them that was hard for them to sustain and maintain their housing, because it's my understanding that each one of those individualized heaters was then an additional bill for those residents, and they had not moved into that building with that understanding. So there were changes. When I looked at the lease, there were changes, material changes, to how they were living in the current day as opposed to how they had contractually agreed to live there. So there's a high sense of concern, but the Red Cross and the Village of Hempstead's Parks Department is doing a great job in making sure that they're comfortable there.
Where are they going
Thank
to
you.
stay for the next 2 weeks?
So in the immediate, the first 48 hours is turned over to, the families are turned over to the Red Cross, and from that point moving forward, various departments, including the Department of Social Services for Nassau County, will have to do evaluations to determine what our next steps are.
At this time, Deputy Mayor is going to come. He's our last speaker for today.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am truly thankful to the fire department, to our police, to all of the people that was involved. But I want to go off road for a minute and take this up a notch. The things that's happening into these apartments here with these slumlords that we have here is unacceptable. There must be something that we can do. I mean, I don't know if you understand that had these people, had this happened at 2 o'clock in the morning, it would have been a disaster. It would have been a disaster. And walking in that building and looking at the conditions is deplorable. And there's something that we all must do. to make certain that all our residents have a safe and healthy place to live. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.